Hello everyone, welcome to the Indie panel. Today we kickstart the first day for the Indie panel on the last day of IGDC. But nonetheless, we have got some amazing speakers today. Before we begin, I would like to officially take a moment to thank all of our sponsors. The presenting sponsor for this event is Unreal Engine. We want to thank our gold sponsors MPL, AWS, 𝐒𝐿𝐵𝐻𝐿𝐵 and Junglee. We want to thank our legacy silver sponsors 𝐉𝐚𝐫𝐫𝐻𝐿𝐵, Lakshya and 𝐿𝐵𝐻𝐿𝐵, as well as our bronze sponsors Quali and 𝐾𝐚𝐫𝐫 Studios. Hyper Casual Track sponsor is Sunday and IP Connect sponsor is Succeed Innovation Fund. So today we've got a very special guest with us, Stefan. As the COO and co-founder of Streamline Media Group, Stefan helps creatives and innovators succeed. He works with the Streamline industry family of brands, Streamline family of brands, Streamline Studios, Streamline Games, All Pixels, Day Zero and Streamframe to build long-term partnerships in the entertainment and enterprise video gaming space. He believes that Streamline is in the business of creatives and innovators who value partnerships that leverage their mutual expertise. Stefan runs the publishing and production teams at the studio in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, and works with the design and marketing teams on their product portfolio. And he has over 20 years of experience in video games and has worked with industry leaders such as Square Enix, Capcom, Sony, Epic Games, Nintendo, and more. And today, Stefan is here to give his insights on how you can make it big as an indie game developer. So Stefan, over to you. Also, before I begin, I'm passing out a form for any kind of feedback that you guys might have with regards to this talk. So please check out the handout section for the form link. And yeah, Stefan, over to you now.
Thank you, Nikhil, for the amazing introduction, actually. So I will be sharing my screen. 1 second here. We're going to get some media going, it's supposed to be, video games supposed to be vibrant and colorful. So if I can figure that out. Here we go. So I'm sharing my screen. I trust this works, Nikhil. I don't see you, so you just have to tell me that it's okay.
Yeah, it works fine, and it's by default pinned as well.
Okay, perfect. Then let's jump into it. So yeah, the talk is about essentially how to make it as an indie, but we're going to talk about what that actually means nowadays, because obviously, for example, for us, we are maybe a bit atypical. We're independent. We've worked with major brands over the years. And so I'm going to reframe this a little bit, and essentially we're going to talk about really what is an independent developer in 2021 and into the future. How do you grow that without losing your mind, right? Because there's a lot of changes. So we're going to talk about the changes, and we're going to talk about where the industry is today, what that really means. And then we're going to workshop a little bit, kind of imagining if we're starting studio today, if we started studio together, what would be the questions that we should really talk about? What are the decisions we have to make to kind of build ourselves in the best possible way for being a successful independent developer? So this is a mix of, our journey, I guess, the experience from that, but really also kind of adapting to the craziness of the world as it is today. So a little bit about Streamline ourselves. So I guess, actually Nikhil's update, his introduction has been really good. But, one thing I really like about our group is it's very international. We have groups from across all the continents. And, our leadership team has really benefited from that in embracing, I think, a kind of attitude towards, creativity and what it means across the world. It doesn't matter where you work, where you come from, what your background is in a culture. Video games is a global culture. And this next generation is going to show that even more. So some of the games that we're working on for other partners, Soulstorm, Death Stranding, for Sony, Lord of the Rings, Outriders for Square Enix, Final Fantasy for Square Enix. But these kind of major titles that people probably see first when they think about maybe partnerships of Streamline. Having programmers, designers on these large titles is of course great. But at the same time, we also enjoy working on smaller independent titles where, Risk of Rain, of Code, and of course our own Bake and Switch, which you actually learn very different things from working on those kind of games. So I'm going to kind of present here to you guys kind of an angle that mixes both of these experiences together because, modern independents live in both worlds. The distinction between I'm a pure indie, I'm just going to do very kind of low budget things, and I'm AAA, I'm doing high budget things, that's kind of fallen away a little bit. And we'll talk about the reasons behind why that's happening. So for us as a studio, we have grown into these kind of 5 brands that are dealing with, some are dealing with authentic, independent products that we're building for ourselves or for other people. Others are maybe more about scale art production or kind of what's nowadays called like metaverse productions, where you work maybe on a fashion game one day and, an Unreal Engine visualization the next day, and then the next day it's a full-on AAA game, and then indie game. So a lot of a variety at our studio that we can kind of helps us to triangulate between where the industries are going. This kind of branching out between different brands also is happening and branching out into different locations. We are in Kuala Lumpur, we're in Europe, and also in Vegas with a development studio now as well. All right, let's jump into it. So development today, or like what is indie development? Maybe the first thing that comes to mind is like, that means we're going to be on Steam, we're going to early access, like you look at games like Hades and others, and this is going to be really our path, right? Like Unity powered early access on Steam or something like this. But when you actually research into it, the traditional routes are becoming really contested with major titles. And you look at like the big games that are being played on these platforms, it's like PUBG, Sekiro, Halo, all the major titles that you always hear about. This is, I think, from a year ago. So it's not quite the same anymore to say like indie path is just launch it and the Steam algorithm is going to surface you. That was maybe true 10 years ago, particularly. Nowadays it isn't. So we're going to talk about that a little bit because we need to talk about today, because if I just tell you about my experience, it'll be like a dinosaur. Right? Like it's not going to be necessarily applying to you anymore. Even talking about like go to Steam, it's like dated, right? So very quickly it would be just like outdated for you guys to hear this. All right, so let's jump into it. What is independent development today? And we're going to orientate ourselves with really what are some trends going on that you might not traditionally think about as independent studios in our space, indie studios, but actually they are, and it's relevant to you guys because you're going to get asked about it. You're going to have people that want to work for you that might be interested in it, and you will have, well, honestly, funding and interests coming from people that want to build companies in that direction. So first thing, I'm just kind of using us as an example. We're an independent developer, but we might end up working, building virtual backlot sets, for the VBC. In this case, you need Unreal Engine set extensions. That might be one day. The next day, it might be using, Unreal Unity for like a fashion show or something with volumetric video. And the next day, it might be helping, a VR community for Microsoft, building that out. So you don't think of this as indie productions, but at the same time, there are an enormous amount of studios that are entering this space, from kind of what I would call industry adjacent angles, from media, from television, from agencies, advertisement, and they're all kind of finding their way as what really independent development means to them. And they might start with this and then they make games. Whereas for you guys, you might make a game first and then suddenly you will get asked for, hey, what about these other things? That's very, very possible. So really, why is this happening now? Why is there such a kind of a fanning out when 10 years ago it wasn't quite the case? Well, let's take a look at really where the traditional games industry is and why there's so much happening outside of it, which was really kind of startling to some people. So the first thing is, actually, you have probably noticed this, but like the major publishers are not releasing as much content as they used to, right? Like, let's say 10, 20 years ago, Sony and Nintendo, they would release, tons of sort of titles every year, just like mainlining from their own studios. But as productions have sort of ballooned and, it's become more with major franchise releases, instead of dozens, it's maybe 1 or 2 or 3 major titles coming out from the major publishers. And it's really built around releasing franchises, so this is important because it does affect even the indie community players' expectations for certain things, right? Like you play fewer games longer, at least that's what's created as a habit in players. That is also, I think, a response to something that is oftentimes not talked about, but the core gamer audience, the ones that play, Steam games, that play PlayStation and other titles, and to some degree into higher mobile games, it is actually a relatively static player base. It is roughly 250 million consumers. That's it. That hasn't grown over the years, like over the last 20 years, that hasn't really changed much, right? And that is a bit startling. Like, why are not really more people playing it? When you think, like, what about mobile games? And yeah, they live in a bit of a different space, and people were hoping that they would kind of join, mature out into the mainstream games, but it actually hasn't happened. A lot of them just lost interest again. So what's going on with that? Where are the new players, right? And at the same time, you have an automation process happening where more and more you can actually, as a small team, make yourself production value that is just incredible compared to what was possible 2 years ago. Like with Unreal Engine's MetaHumans, you don't have to hire a whole character art team. So you have this kind of strange mix already. On this page, you'd be kind of like, that's a bit weird. So fewer games, but where's the audience? Yet at the same time, it gets easier to make really good-looking games. So just keep that in mind, because we're just going to explore the landscape a little bit. Because the truth is, there isn't an easy answer to some of this. It's just a big buffet right now that you have to be aware of. Because as an independent studio, you're going to have to make some decisions on where you want to go in this new landscape. So let's kind of take a look even further out beyond our industry. What are some changes that are driving through here right now? First thing is, baby boomers are retiring. The first millennials are already in their 40s almost. They are having kids now by themselves. They all grew up with technology as like a sort of a native just adoption that they're very, very used to. I mean, this is true for probably a large part of the audience as well. So you have this kind of digital native community coming up, and at the same time, and this is actually really crucial, the developers that made games in the 90s and early 2000s, they're retiring now. They're handing over the torch to a new generation, which also includes the new indie studios that are coming up. This is also why there's a lot of acquisitions right now happening. So then there's, these sort of like a broader push towards digitization of financial assets, blockchain, crypto, NFTs is quite controversial topic to talk about. I get that, but it's not going to go away, and it is going to be influencing also how games are being produced. It's going to influence free-to-play, it's going to influence how communities are built. It isn't settled yet exactly how that's going to work, but you have to be aware that this is definitely changing our space as well. Then the pandemic has come in, which makes it more comfortable to be at home. So this has changed expectations for players towards a lot more mobile aspects. We've seen it in a lot of our titles where the demand to have an online component is much higher than it used to be. Like you just can't go to a person's couch so easily anymore. The parents will be nervous, or the friends and cousins, don't go over there, just play from home. There's more hesitation now. So online is much more important nowadays for a lot of titles. And the truth is, like India, Latin America, Southeast Asia, Africa, the next 2 billion players are emerging. The question is, what are they going to be playing? What is going to be interesting to them with everything we just talked about, plus obviously, the local cultural relevance. How is it going to emerge? Be taken advantage by developers in that region, and this is, I think, something relevant to some of you guys. So the main thing to take away from all of that is the video games is coming to be used on making events digital. It's much more prevalent for community building, and it is really kind of central to Web 2.0, like HTML pages are kind of merging with video games as well. So pretty wild that you have NFTs on one hand today, and then the next day you might work with PS5 dev kits. That's where it's going. And again, a lot of that is going to be commitment and learning, and it's important to be like, well, what do we want to focus on as an independent? So just to be clear, I'm going to give you guys some options here in a buffet of what you want to be. Does this mean that everybody has to be like get bought by some Western studio? Everything has to be mega projects with hundreds of people, and everything has to be big, bulky, PlayStation dev kits, and it's just about making the biggest, baddest game with thousands of people? It's like, no. Actually, never before has this been less true than it is today. It is much more about what you want to do, what will bring real creativity, innovation to the space you want to be successful in. And we're going to talk about that. So I can kind of like leave this behind, because it's important to kind of like not get stuck in. It's not being nagged by any publisher. Be like, oh, you need to be this much bigger, or we don't deal with studios of your size. Don't let them be there. So let's talk about that. What studio do you want to build? We're going to just kind of workshop our way through this a little bit. The landscape of opportunity is wider than ever before. All right, it all starts the same way. Sure, fair enough. We'll start out, probably in some kind of big dreams, working from home, getting some of our friends to join in, and we're kind of like hustling our way through, and probably never been a better time to do it than now, because people will invest in you even when you're probably in kind of like still very starting up phase. So, but obviously the fun part to get to is kind of like phase 2, right? Which is kind of like the really the fun part. You're like, let's say 10, 20 people in size, like the creativity is flowing, everything's kind of falling into place, things are moving fast. You kind of get your first prototypes going, things are really kind of, jiving together. And this next stage, this is the important one. what happens after this, right? Because I would imagine most people will look at this, hey, I'm in India, 10, 15 people. That's it. I want to just live in that. That's my jam, right? But there is a real question of this market, all these things we just talked about, they're going to apply pressure. We're going to apply pressure on you guys to figure out, is there something that comes after this? Yes or no? And sometimes your game, your community, your investors might demand it. And the big question is, what does phase 3 look like when everybody is that what happens? Everyone puts on a suit and, it's all about business now. What does that actually mean, right? So it doesn't have to be something scary, intimidating. It's something you guys have to understand, that if you want to be at a successful independent studio, you can't be 11 people. You need to be comfortable being 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, because there is a demand for, increasing the quality, increasing the platform variety that you're building for, building all the online components that might be needed. It's just, there's a lot of stuff that will come your way. And it's something where just keep it in the back of your mind, it's okay to grow, and we're going to grow in a smart way. And that is what makes a successful independent developer, is you kind of not afraid of the horizon, right? At least you've been prepared for it. So again, you can be like this, but you can look like that and have that kind of energy. That's fine, but you're just going to be aware of it. Let's talk about a couple of options, what an independent studio can look like. And you might be like, wow, that's a weird way to look at it. But all of the ones that I'm showing you now, this started as something small, right? So you could go an independent studio into hundreds or thousands of people employed, purely working on service components. Probably not very interesting to most people, but certainly possible. Probably somebody will do this in the audience, possible. Or you say we love to be the indie darling. We're going to be very focused on the audience that we have, that we know will stay working with Kickstarter, early access. They kind of, I don't want to call it the traditional path, because that's not really fair either, but it is essentially that is what we love to be, right? Very indie focused, and we know what our audience is. Totally possible. Then of course we can say, okay, how about you grow that into a more kind of modern competitive game, like Genshin Impact or something, like the MiHoYo guys, right? Free-to-play angle, a bit more focus on platform as market success, can be afraid of scaling, right? These guys are definitely over 100, but still independent, possibilities there as well. Or do you say, we're going to specialize in talking to publishers to get our pitches that we think are really exciting landed with our publishers. And we'll talk about this step a little bit further later as well. So it's just good to know. And a lot of game studios are in this bracket, right? They are typically 70 people to 150 people in size. They might outsource some of the work, but generally speaking, a lot of it is internally. They're doing high-end work. They might get help from other companies, but they're definitely going to get backed by a publisher for most of the titles. And this is just sort of the rotation, right? They work with a publisher, they pitch, publisher says yes, let's make a deal, and then the next deal comes, and so on and so forth. Or you can say we're going to be wild, we're going to do something that is tech, go into Wild West of something that is possible, right? Very interesting. Well, right? Or you say, and this is also a very lucrative path actually, is it's kind of working on existing IPs, maybe kids games, or you partner with major IPs, and you say, we're just going to earn our way up, but we do want to work on products right from the start. And this, Paw Patrol or something like this, is a major franchise, and these games will just sell by themselves, right? So finding a publisher that works with you on that is a very good way to work your way up the chain. So lots of different flavors of something that is a bit similar, but definitely important to think about. So who will you be, and how will you succeed? That's the question. So based on what we just looked at, just keep in mind kind of where your preferences are, and let's dig into this a bit. So where's your heart and passion? Is it mobile games versus console games? And again, you've got to be honest. What is it where you want to be, and then discuss what kind of team do you want to build, and who's on board for that. Is it free to play? Is it premium? Think about also the markets. Where do you want to be successful? Is it your own market versus the overseas market? Can you access? Can you understand that market? Are you all in with your AR and VR? Are you going for the traditional route, or is it more NFT and blockchain? Think about it. You don't have to have the answer for it, but you do want to kind of write down the question marks, being these are not things we understand yet, and we'll figure it out. That should be sort of the takeaway from this, because the truth is that many studios, any studio honestly that isn't spending millions, billions of dollars, I would imagine, maybe not billions, but millions, on true market research is always going to be a little bit tapping in the unknown. So this is Nothing kind of unusual, right? Other questions, do you stand for a social change? Do you want to make a statement? Like, again, what kind of people do you want to attract? Is it creative, or is it, more business? I want to work on existing things. You want to work on Disney and Marvel, or do you want to make your own Disney? Right? Change the world, excuse me. So in a similar way, kind of like, is technology to your means to an end, or is it really the core driver of your business? So it's driven by design and creativity, or are you like a technology company? Again, you will build a different kind of company because of that. So let's talk about the path to stability. And this really needs to be on your mind from the beginning. Like, well, how do we, day one, okay, how do we make our money, right? Are we going to like do work for hire and ask, other people to have us make games for them? Are we going to start with kind of component work, service work, or we're just going to say like, no, money has to pour in first? All right, so let's talk about that. So investment is interesting because firstly, the market is in a good place for investment. So what matters to investors, I think in particular, is that they can feel your passion, your energy for, okay, like this, this team really believes in this. This team believes in themselves. I can believe in this team. They're having a convincing product idea that I can get behind, right? Like they will jump on board when they sense the leadership, kind of has that unique edge to it, and they're like, okay, we're going to take a chance on these guys. So polishing your promise, meaning essentially focus on really like how you deliver what makes you unique, and if you can obviously show early indicators of your success, if you can kind of show we have traction online, or we have a fan community that really wants this, or there's like a gap that you can kind of see in the market, you can kind of make a good argument for it. Yeah, investment path, you might have something, but it comes with gives and takes. Work for hire is actually very different because you're not going to get away with so much of like, I'm the creative with the vision. It needs to be about, I understand you, my customer. It is about communicating clearly to them. You have confidence in technical skills. You probably have some background working for other companies before, and it's about like, I will be stable with you. I will be supportive with you. We'll work together, and I will support you. But the truth is, work for hire. There's a lot of money to be made in that. But if you do it well, it is something we can charge quite good rates for that, and you should. Do know your worth. And so recommended to look into that, but be ready to be asked a lot of questions about security and about all that, and business development skills you have to have. So you have 10 minutes left, so I'm going to get a bit more breezy. But yeah, in service work, artwork, you need to have a past portfolio. That's the most important thing, and then you're going to go out there on the trade shows and understand your pricing. Beyond that, understand your audience. No easy answer. Again, you have to do your research, and think about it from the very beginning, like who's going to play our game and where, because you've got to be understanding how to reach them. And the truth is, you might say like, I want to play it, like this is for me, but it is going to become a business the moment it's about like somebody has to press the purchase button. What consoles is it? What platforms is it? Who's going to buy it? And then talk about what is the end game. Do you want to be acquired, or do you want to kind of, for the next 10, 20, 30 years work on this? It will again change the kind of people you're going to attract, because you might find some great talent that comes from like maybe a finance background or business background. They're like 5 to 10 years, let's build it up and then we flip it. That's one way to do it. You might be like, it's all about just making games and be independent. It changes again who you attract. Will you invest either way? Or are you going to bootstrap by not taking investment early on, prove yourself first, drive up your value, and then, obviously keep more for yourself later on by sort of bootstrapping your way through. So one big flag I want to throw out as well, and to be a successful independent, that's important. Don't undersell your value, even to big brands. Like, don't sign unfair deals where you feel, like, oh, well, this is such a big IP, like, therefore I'm going to just do something that later on I'm going to regret. Like, no, like, you got to be very careful, and we'll talk a little bit about this later on, some specific examples. Like, don't undersell your value. Don't be insecure about that. Like, it's important you don't do that. What you should do is present yourself with a balanced way. Clearly articulate things you can and cannot do. Like, trust me, you don't need to be a studio that like, we can do everything, whatever you want, like we can do it. Like, don't do that. In fact, if you draw limits, it's going to go very well, because people will think, you clearly know what your standards are, what you're comfortable with doing. So just keep that in mind. So just don't come off arrogant as you do it. That's important. Don't do that. But of course, and this is important, easy to forget when all the creative stuff happens, which by the way, that's why I'm not talking about it much, because everyone else can talk about that. What's your horizon for payroll? How many months do you have in the bank account? Keep an eye out for that. More than anything, that is what keeps your company alive. Like, as a business owners, you're going to be obsessed with this. Literally, this is what keeps you as a successful indie. You can make payroll, right? And the next step is, how do you make more money later on? Like, what is your horizon? Can you look 3 months out, 6 months out, 12 months out in terms of deal flow, right? Like opportunities coming in. and you should always have at least 3, 4, 5 times more coming in than you need, because it'll usually fall off and you'll end up with just enough. Just keep that in mind. So if you're looking at the work for hire path, have some redundancies available, and do keep an eye for the market for crazy things happening, trade wars and crisis. You always got to have some backups in play, because if you're working especially for others or publishers, if they gave you money, they might say like, yeah, it's all good, but at one point they're going to be like, I don't care that your planes don't fly, or that things have gotten twice as expensive. You're going to be aware of that. All right, so the real grind, team dynamics. Assume you will grow, so talk about responsibilities in the team early. Who's going to do what are your specializations? What are we leaving behind? What are we going to do great? Founders versus first team members versus later team members. Understand there's a culture difference between the different types. You can talk about it with the founders first, understand what you want to share, how you want to motivate and grow the next generation, because the first hires will be your next senior leadership. Just develop them today, and 2, 3, 4, 5 years later, they will run your company or big parts of it. So be aware of this. Next thing is you will grow, at least, most likely you will be kind of pushed into growing, and be really aware of like these boundaries and how things will change between 20, 50, 70, 120 and beyond. If you want that, it's going to change your company culture, and you have to invest into it. And if it feels weird and is orientating, that's okay. You've got to talk about it. You've got to learn from your new team members, like what is it that isn't working, listen to them and fix it. It's a normal part of the process. Next thing is meant to be a bit surprising, but the big platform holders actually are quite encouraging of direct relationships oftentimes with the new independent studios coming up. So talk to them, find out from your account managers that you can get assigned to, like what are maybe some great marketing beats you can get attached to by releasing something. What is a program when you're going to a trade show, or what about getting dev kits to where you are. And some of that based on location in India, that might be a bit more tricky. Here in KL, it also wasn't always easy, but there are ways of doing it, right? Like you just have to keep these conversations warm, and you will find willingness in people trying to help you try to find something to make it work. So learn about those programs, and invest into those relationships today, fully understanding again it might pay off only years later. Remember, we're talking about becoming a really successful independent. That is something that you build over years. It doesn't happen overnight. So next thing is business development. You got to get out there. I mean, it's great that we have IGDC and everything here, and there's people coming there, but your stability as a studio is also going to be judged on your strength of sending your own staff, to go to shows overseas, do business development there. And there, what's going to be very important is, you're going to make a pitch yourself, pitch your studio, pitch your products, pitch your services. You will iterate on this pitch. You will find out what works or doesn't work. You take that in and you keep improving it. I can tell you, after 20 years, we're still doing that. Like every show, there's feedback. Okay, adjust again the pitch, and there's hundreds of them, right? Like that evolve over time. This is normal. Don't be afraid of it. Again, this is what's going to make you successful in the long run. You're going to learn, right? And then, learning about landing a deal is about really having confidence built in your partner that you guys can do that, right? So this is a kind of a balance between, skills you can show, personality, and, that bit of like, okay, these guys are special. And that has to come through in your deck, that again, you're iterating.
Stefan, I'm sorry. I think I accidentally turned off your screen share. So could you reshare that?
Oh, sure.
It just happened in the last, just the last post.
Sure, no problem. Here we go. Is it back?
Yes, it is.
All right. So deal making. So I mentioned this earlier as a watch out point. So let's talk about it a little bit. I'm breezing through this, but okay. So first thing is, again, you do not have to sign the contracts that are presented to you, even if they're presented to you like everyone else signs this. Like there's no reason to do it. You can look very clearly. You ask questions at the very least. You should have somebody on your side that is a lawyer, that you contract out a little bit. Get advice. A lawyer might tell you immediately, like, there's some really weird stuff in there. Be careful. You might sign away more than you want to. And again, everyone might say like this is something everyone just signs, but that is not true. And it is less true. So, I mean, yes, over the years, for sure, we've heard this many, many times. And sometimes a lot of people will sign things we don't sign as a company. But that is also, I think, one reason that we're still around, right? Because we're careful with that. So I'll give you some examples. Over-inquisitive, contracts, like they're saying, like, this person, tell me everything about them, tell me about your shareholder structure, tell me about business structure, investment structure. Depending on what you're doing, it doesn't really concern them necessarily, right? As you can say, this is not relevant. They might ask questions about like internal IT structure, all this. Like some of that is fair, right? Like you can listen to that. Sometimes you may say that's maybe a bit much, that's maybe too not relevant for the particular project you're doing. Use your judgment on this. But overall, personalized data, specific portfolios. I would be very careful with how much you want to give someone access to, because it's also a way to really sniff out your company and figure out your special sauce without really having made a real partnership with you. So you need to be careful with how much you share. And it is, again, not necessary to do this. I can tell you that. Like, if somebody says everyone does it, it's like, not necessarily true. Contract terms, you got to watch out for a couple of things. It might say termination for convenience. This means as a partner, I can cancel on you anytime. I don't think that's fair. You need to be careful with that. Very important is royalty terms and understanding how they're structured. There's something called advanced royalties. This means a publisher will give you money, when you sign up. And oh, cool, here's $1 million. Okay, well, how is that? Then what happens with that money? How is that being paid back? Most likely it is paid back to the publisher. What is the trade that you do for getting that money early on, like giving you a loan? What are the terms for that loan? Essentially, that's going to be baked into the contract. Questions about IP ownership, who's owning it. You shouldn't necessarily trade early on your ownership. Understand approval cycles and milestones. What this means is that make clear to the partner when you expect them to get back to you. They couldn't just say, we'll review a milestone in 6 months from now or never, whatever, and then they pay you never. Say, please review it in a week, in 2 weeks, and then, either say yes or no. Work on these kind of things. Again, I'm going through this very fast, but almost there. Also, don't be afraid to have a voice like Nikhil here, who's online, get involved in a global community, get your voice out there. That's very crucial. It is not as hard as you think, and not as many people are doing it as they should. So please get involved in that. It also actually stabilizes the business because you're going to get more opportunities from it. And now it's going to be very fast. Like we said, partnership is a dance. Communication style matters very much. Focus on your strengths and weaknesses, share them. Leave breathing room for your partner to have a back and forth in the dance with you, and prepare for growth. Okay, we're talking about this. Very fast now, yeah. Career growth, have an HR department, laying groundwork for the different departments. When you actually have made it, don't let this slide. And development is only one part of it. Just keep that in mind. Intuition, luck, all plays into it, and more importantly, planning for success, planning for the future. And beyond that, having fun.
Wow, Stefan. A round of applause for you. Thanks a lot for that very informative talk. And I apologize to each and every one of that small glitch. So, Stefan, there's just one request from the audience. Could you repeat the BizDev part that got kind of missed out?
The BizDev part, sure, hold on, which one was that?
Going to multiple conferences.
Right, okay, well, I guess I'm going to talk about it just like this, it's okay. So, okay, business development, like you're going to remember, like who's going to take care of you when you need to make payroll happen. So you gotta be able to show to your overseas partners that you are a strong studio that already can send people overseas and can make your own bread happen, essentially. So business development is going to be very crucial. You should have at least one person that is becoming comfortable talking to the platforms, comfortable talking to the major publishers over there, ideally. That person should be looking at building long-term relationships. You're not going to make a sell immediately, but you're going to be building something that in 6 months, 12 months, and so on is going to eventually give you traction. Very important is that this person coordinates with the creatives and the business team on your end on honing that pitch. So that was really important. Like, how do I present myself? How do I present my company? How do I present my product? And understanding that this is going to be a learning process. That even for us, like every pitch that we're presenting, we're still learning from it, because also publishers, and this is really important, publishers come in a lot of different varieties, investors come in different varieties. They have very different understandings of what is actually going to be the future of game development. And so what you're hearing from one is like a no, or the other one is a yes, and the other one is a maybe. You're going to take that all in, and from it, you're going to sort of make your own judgments. But you then have to ensure that when you go and again do business development to these different studios, or these different publishers or different partners, that you're kind of like beginning to anticipate what kind of pitch is going to be the right fit for that particular kind of personality. Because they're going to be different, but you're not going to learn that until you kind of do it and get a feeling for it. And again, even for us after 20 years, we're still kind of doing it. So just something that you always have to do. Biz dev is an ongoing organic process, and every product also needs a different approach. and every service is a different approach. But you've got to get out there. Like, do not wait for them to come here, because it will put you in a disadvantage. They will feel like they're the ones coming in doing you the favor. You don't want to be that. You want to be over there, and then it's an even balanced conversation.
Awesome. So guys, that was the time. But Stefan, I've been told that we can take some Q&A. So we'll open the stage, and we already have a few questions in this really picked. So I found the Q&A section. One question that got these games by us. Yes.
From a perspective, launching is very purifying. If you can do it fast, if you can make a small game and you can get it out there in a couple of months, I would do that, because you will learn a lot from that experience. But once you have a real title that you really put a lot of blood and sweat into it, you might launch it and then nothing happens, right? And you also need to think about where is the audience for this title? How is the build up for that particular audience? What about getting onto the right platforms? Can you really do, PC, PlayStation, Xbox? Can you do that? Can you do Switch? Do you have that, or should you work with a partner on this? So I think at this point, it is probably better once you have a real product that you're taking it to a publisher. However, I would always do it with the attitude of, if I don't find the right publisher, I'll just burn it to the bridge and just do it release myself. So you don't get into the mindset of oh my god, it must do this, otherwise everything will explode. No, if you think you have something good, you have something hot, patience, find the right fit for you, and it will come, right? You keep promoting it, you keep looking for it. Nothing worse than signing up with a publisher that is not a fit for you, that honestly is going to give you more grief than it's worth. You don't want that, right? You've got to find the right fit, and they might come over time, which goes back to biz dev. You've got to have options, and that's also important. Find a couple.
Awesome. The next question is asked by Arthi is, what do you think is the most common mistakes done by being new as an indie game developer?
As a new indie developer, I think it is easy to underestimate the last 10% of finishing the product. So you might have something that plays well, you've got a couple of levels, it's really fun, you showed to a couple of relatives, really, okay, there we go. But then, if you haven't gone through the process before, there's a lot of submission process, there's a lot of kind of certification processes for the things. You might want to launch the game, in 2 months it's ready, it's good to go, right? But you've got to get age ratings done, you've got to get the consoles to approve it for you, you need to get certified, you need to get maybe translated. So it's quite possible that where you think it's going to finish and when it actually comes out is a year later, right? For a proper kind of let's say Switch title, or like a console title. In Steam and all that is easier because it's just a robot more or less pushing it out for you. But even then, quality expectations will be there. Do you have different language support? Have you really thoroughly tested it on a variety of different devices, OSs and all that? So it's easy to underestimate all the expectations that nowadays players have. Between platforms, languages, support, certifications, and everything.
Awesome. And we'll take the last question for the day. It's asked by Aditya Ravichandran. He asked, how important is it to have someone on the legal side?
Okay, so if you're literally one person, obviously hire one person full time as a lawyer is not required. But we have a full legal team. We have 3 attorneys employed internally, because there's always something going on at one point. I think if you're making a deal, you definitely need to have someone looking at it. You need to understand what you're signing. This is very important, because what happens if it's a huge hit? What happens if you signed the deal where you gave away the IP, or 90% of the revenue, or the right to the sequel is going to someone else, or they can port it and change it on the ports to something else. You don't know, right? And in the end of the day, if you're a solo developer but you have a hot property, you are going to be vulnerable to just here's the deal, the first deal that sounds really, really good. So I would definitely say you need to have somebody looking at it, even if it's maybe a family member, but get some insights on it. This does matter, right? If somebody is whatever, then you might regret it later, and you might think like, oh, well, this company is in the UK or in the US or somewhere. But again, if this becomes a hit, it suddenly there's a lot of money involved. You need to be able to have that reach.
Awesome. Stefan, thanks a lot for being so kind and answering all these questions, and the talk was wonderful. Personally, even I got to learn a lot, so thanks for that. And guys, you have been a wonderful audience. I'm sure you guys have tons more questions, so please do feel free to connect with Stefan on whatever social media. Stefan, LinkedIn is fine. LinkedIn.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean, and if you have interesting products, I am building up our publishing arm, so happy to look at that as well.
Awesome. So get in touch with Stefan, and as I mentioned in the beginning of the talk, feel free to give feedback in the handout section. We are looking forward for your feedback on this talk, and I hope you guys learned a lot. So Stefan, I'll meet you backstage now.
Thank you.
Backstage.